Hey there, this is Dan, the producer for Mark and Carrie. If you like this show, we highly recommend you check out Watson's other podcast, Trending Globally. You'll hear more in-depth conversations about politics and policy from some of the world's leading experts, including, occasionally, Mark and Carrie. You can find us by subscribing to Trending Globally on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Again, that's Trending Globally. All right, on with the show. Thanks.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Mark and Carrie, the April edition. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Hello there. Just having a cup of tea, as one does, as a British subject.
Yeah.
We'll get to Prince Philip. We'll get to Prince Philip at the end of the show.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course, we have to talk about him. How are you feeling about life? Spring is here. You know, the birds are chirping. How are you? What are your thoughts?
Vaccinations are here.
Yeah.
So it's funny. I was just on the phone with someone talking about this, and so there's the expectation that boom, we're going to have a boom, everything's going to boom, and then there'll be inflation, which is kind of funny because it's sort of like after a long darkness we have a boom, which is good, but we then have to make it crappy by having it. Whoa, inflation, very bad, right? But what's complicating this is, I don't know, the Brazilian variants.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. What's complicating this is the fact that some states in the South now apparently have vaccines just going to waste because they've kind of vaccinated all the people that really think it's important to get vaccinated, and we're nowhere near where we need to be. So there is a distinct possibility that we can screw this up. That even with vaccines in the summer and everything else, we could basically kind of get into a situation where the new variants overwhelm the population that doesn't have the vaccinations, and then the whole thing could start up again. The other thing that's kind of frustrating on all this, and this thing about the boom, is very lazy thinking. You can only boom if you aren't bust. And as we've said repeatedly on this podcast, little factoid, half the country earns $20 or less. And there's huge amounts of debt. So those stimulus checks actually are not going straight into GameStop. They're going into paying the rent that hasn't been paid for a month. So there's a huge amount of people that have made a huge amount of money, but they're the already rich.
Yeah.
And they don't spend enough to basically have a giant boom. So if you add together, maybe we're going to screw up the vaccination, and what leads from there. And then you add to that the fact that like maybe there just isn't enough money going around in the people who actually need it to actually have a real boom, then maybe it won't be as boomy as we thought.
Well, I did see the headline in the Post that said, "Will the economy get too hot?" And I thought, what? I rolled because I thought, can the economy get too hot? And of course, it was the kicker was inflation and the world's going to fall apart and all of that sort of stuff. And then you turn the page and it's, 900,000 jobs have been added to the economy, all of that sort of stuff. The super rich are buying $4,000 ice makers, and then everybody else has lost their job. And so it's just obviously I have to stop reading the newspaper, but it's hard to find a through line of where sort of what's the medium, what's the average person feeling like. I'm not buying $4,000 ice maker, but I'm hanging on, and to just make sense of all the economic talk.
No, exactly. I mean, and where are those media outlets located? They're located in very expensive cities.
Yeah.
Right? They're located in the parts of the world where you can have a boom and where all the wealth is created. Is there going to be much of a boom in rural Wisconsin?
Right.
Is there going to be much of a boom in, let's say, the southern states, including those that, when they have the chance to form a union, don't, in part because they're so worried that if they vote yes, then their employer will move and they will have no jobs again?
Yeah.
Doesn't exactly sound like overheating, does it?
Well, and I was thinking about this in relation to my home state of Michigan, which the CDC is now saying should do a shutdown, a la what the UK is now just coming out of. And of course, the governor doesn't want to do that for all the political reasons. But I mean, the B.1.1 variant is the one that's just like tearing through the state right now. So when, all the talk of a fourth wave or whatever number of wave we're on, you do wonder, do the experts maybe have a point? It seems like they might.
Well, yeah, but, in fairness, they're always chasing last month's information, and we don't really know. I mean, the only thing we can really say at this point is it's really wonderful that we have all these vaccines, and if we look at Europe, we've even managed to stuff that up. And at the end of the day, this virus is going to keep mutating. And if you don't take the vaccine, then eventually it's going to get a hold in the population. And that's exactly what's happening in Michigan.
Yeah.
So, there is your future. The future is Michigan.
I'm curious of your take on this about, so Brown just came out for next fall requiring vaccine for all students. This follows Rutgers and follows other universities as well. So not a big surprise there. But I'm wondering what your take is on if we move it up to your employer mandated vaccine. I don't think you haven't seen employers actually mandate it yet, but just reading about whether there is that legal leg to stand on, whether employees can require that or not, and what your thought is about vaccine mandates.
Well, we have vaccine mandates. They're called for school kids.
Yeah.
Like you can't send your kid to school unless they've had certain shots. And if you refuse to do so, then the schools can say, well, thanks, but we're not going to take your kid. I really don't see why it should be any different. Yeah. I mean, there's this idea, the sort of like, I have the right, this kind of sovereign citizen nonsense, right? I have the right, the rights are in me. It's like with rights come responsibilities, and they're all vis-a-vis your responsibilities to others. So if you want to walk around being a public health risk, then you're totally welcome to do so. But then don't expect your employers and public services and other people to basically give you the time of day. It's really that straightforward. Now, of course, it's easy to say this, right? And it does raise some real issues about personal freedom, etc., that shouldn't be dismissed. But usually under the public health thing, we kind of, give that one the benefit of the doubt. And, when the alternative is, yes, but really Bill Gates, etc., then you got to go, no, can we just stop this now and stop this pandemic, please?
Yeah. No, I have to say when I first started thinking about, my initial reaction was, they even to tell my employer that whether I have the vaccine or not, I was like, I don't really want to do that. And then, of course, I actually had to start thinking about it and that they already know all this stuff about my health as it is. And oh, by the way, CVS is, maybe there's not one Excel spreadsheet that the federal government has, but CVS already knows that I got it when all of these pieces of information are laying around. So it's not as if they're, the powers that be can't sort this out on their own. So it's hard. It's always hard for me, though. My first inclination is, privacy, and I don't want the government in my business to think, oh yeah, well the government already has this. It maybe just not in a centralized sort of format.
Okay, but if this was sort of some kind of giant pandemic STD that only happened to people who had affairs, right? I could understand the privacy angle, but it's not. It's just simply, it's like, have you had a measles shot? Right.
Yeah.
And for me, the killer on this one is, if you pardon the pun, the killer on this one is aircraft, right? So let's suppose that you get the Brazilian variant. It's basically able to bust through even the best vaccines to a certain degree. This one really begins to take hold because we don't do enough vaccinations. And then airlines who are barely just about to take off again, in all senses of the word, turn around and say, you absolutely need to have a vaccine or you don't get on this. Why? Because otherwise our business model will crash. We're done. It's over. So if you want to partake of this service, you need to have the vaccine. That seems perfectly reasonable to me. If you don't want the terms of the contract, don't sign the contract.
Yeah.
You don't have, there's no God-given right to fly, right? Or there's no God-given right to access a private service or a public service.
Yeah. It will be interesting to see. I think it's dead because the White House has pushed back on it, that there's no desire to have this federal mandate, et cetera, a federal mandate for vaccine. But it will be interesting to see whether next year in 2022 this comes up again in terms of, more government intervention. Now, here's my pun, the bridge to the talking about the infrastructure bill, more on how the infrastructure bill is all bloat and fat and, 0% of it is actually going to infrastructure. If that will be part of the Republican talking points and pushing back to win back the House, which they likely will in 2022. Can
we hold that thought for a minute? Right, we just say that as a matter of course because it usually happens. But so far, everything that Biden has done has been quite popular. Mm-hmm. Right, up to and including the stimulus and up to and including the infrastructure spend. He seems to have pretty good positives, right? And why do we all axiomatically assume that, and then they will do well? They don't seem to have anything to stand on. They don't even know how to argue against what he's doing.
Well, I think it's two things. So one thing is the redistricting, that redistricting is going to favor Republicans in terms of those maybe, so if just enough of those swing districts into Republican, stronger Republican districts. But you're making a good point that I'm just assuming out of hand that Biden's going to fall apart and just become, everyone's going to walk on him, that where the economy is may not be successful enough or may not be booming enough to be able to protect the Democrats. But I mean, I guess that falls into the, like, who can predict the future? Nobody can. But the Republicans seem pretty confident, at least for today in 2021, they do.
Well, they would. They just lost, and basically large parts of the country associate them as a criminal conspiracy against the state. So what could they possibly have that would hold them back? Oh, yeah, and then Trump's jumped around in the background.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's go back to infrastructure. I refuse to look into things until they become real. Mm-hmm. So what's unreal about this? Are we going to fund theme parks for the under-12s? I mean, what is or is not infrastructure?
Well, I mean, hold on to your hat here, because infrastructure, Professor Blythe, is not only bridges and tunnels. It is also humans. And that has really difficult, I think, for other humans to understand that it's not just roads and the stuff that we can point to and look at, but it also includes humans. And so there's a number of elements to the bill that is about bringing those from, poor communities, giving them access to better healthcare, job opportunities, like all sorts of stuff like that aren't part of that traditional infrastructure that Republicans are really fussing around. It looks like, at least vote-wise, that the Democrats are going to be able to pull this off. And if that's the case, I mean, to the point that you just made, I mean, Biden becomes, after FDR and Lyndon Johnson, like the third president to have these huge public works bills. So it'll be interesting to see, obviously, what happens in the Senate, because it's so closely Republican Democrat. But I mean, the biggest talking point that the Republicans currently have is that it's not just infrastructure, bridges and tunnels and roads.
Right, because there's more to life than bridges and tunnels.
Yes.
I mean, particularly in a kind of post-industrial economy where we usually do services and skills are highly valued. You might think that investing in the social infrastructure might be a good thing to do. The problem with this, though, is that if you look back at the New Deal, what do you associate the New Deal with? You associate it with federal reach. You associate it with the so-called alphabet agencies, mm-hmm. right? So, the what was it called?
WPA.
The WPA,
yeah.
right? All those sort of different agencies. The one that built the schools and the one that did something else, right? And we don't have that this time round. So what are they going to do? Are they just going to give the money to the states and hope for the best?
I think so. And I mean, lots of distribution by agencies to HHS to do all the health and human service stuff that they do. I mean, lots of stuff to transportation to then funnel out to the cities and the states that need it. The transportation secretary, former mayor Buttigieg, talked about how there are these roads that are like 4 lanes wide and one car drives on it every other day. So being smarter about the types of roads that are built, that sort of stuff. But I mean, lots of stuff around energy and climate control sorts of stuff too. Of course, that's one of the big kickers for the Republicans as well, is that how is the stuff that's preparing the country for this thing that's already here.
Right, and you saw part of that already in the pushback. There are several Republican states that are basically trying to write legislation that effectively taxes renewables in order to preserve carbon jobs, including North Dakota. Most recently, I saw that one there. Texas also tried to do this. But then you have this corporate pushback. So there's this brilliant picture of Jeff Bezos standing atop a windmill, basically saying to Texas, I'd really rethink this if I were you. So it's very interesting to see how American capital is splitting on the climate issue. Because the Republicans are all in on carbon for the reasons that we've talked about, which is kind of sad and depressing, but completely understandable, given that's the business models of the states that they represent. So if this infrastructure bill was to do anything, it would be to transform their infrastructure. But to do that, you kind of need their cooperation and buy-in. And it seems to be that's the one thing that is not going to happen.
Yeah.
So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out.
I know we were going to talk about this, but I just wanted to bring this up because I've been following the immigration story this week. And, one of the reasons that migration specialists are saying there's this quote unquote crisis at the border right now is because of the big hurricanes that hit Guatemala and Honduras this year. And just thinking about how I know we talk about this every time and it's like the dumbest point I'm going to make, but just the interconnected of all of these, the big headline issues and how one cannot be tackled without tackling the other. I mean, we have to think about the migration crisis in connection and within context of what's going on with climate change. And it's happening within the United States. We can't think about it as something that's happening far, far away either.
But if you think about it in that way, you then have to admit that things like climate change are not only real, then they are actual things we need to deal with now.
Yeah.
Which means that your ability to then defend, if you will, the carbon lifestyle, right, the carbon economy becomes really problematized. Because on the one hand, you're saying, so why are all these people trying to get in the United States southern border? Because they come from failed states and we should keep them out. Okay, but why do they come from failed states? That's their problem. No, actually, we can understand what it is. It's really climate change, particularly in the isthmus. Right?
Yes.
You've really got the world's first climate refugees coming out of the isthmus. As we continue to warm, which we're going to, this is only going to get worse. It doesn't matter who's going to be in power. That crisis at the southern border is not going away. So I was looking at some projections for this today that an econ shop in London did. And the numbers involved are just absolutely incredible. If you think about the countries in the world that are likely to warm the fastest. Mm-hmm. So there's a band that basically goes from Iraq to North India to Western China that could go up by 5 degrees, even if on average we only go to 2. Well, you've already got North India at 50 degrees in the summer. The same with some parts of Western China. Push that to 55, you're literally getting to the stress limits of what humans can endure. So imagine 400, 500 million people abandoning that area.
Yeah.
And our little version of that is what's happening for the countries in the isthmus.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is not going away.
Wow. Those huge numbers too. And just a couple degrees, of course, it's hard to wrap your
basically at the level of tolerance, it means that farming collapses.
Yeah.
Right? It's no longer difficult. It's just, it stops.
Right.
And then you can't eat, so you move.
Yeah. Yeah. I was I can't do the transition to our next topic.
There's no segue from that.
No, there isn't. But I did want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Minneapolis with the trial of Derek Chauvin there's several different parts of it, but essentially for the murder of George Floyd, which happened last summer. It's lots and lots of coverage. I thought the most interesting sort of thought piece that I read about it was not about the technical aspects of the trial, but just the trial itself was that it was happening was of note because it rarely happens that you have a police person on trial for killing somebody. I mean, if you look at the numbers for the number of times that this happens and the times that it goes to trial is very infrequent. And so just the fact that this is ongoing is an event in and of itself. That's the point that I was trying to make. Derek Chauvin is on trial for use of excessive force, felony assault causing Floyd's death. So there are a few different aspects to this. And of course, there was the fatal shooting, I think, over the last day in Minneapolis. And then just the spate of mass shootings that we've had over the past 2 weeks too. It's been.
Did you see the video that emerged of the army medic who was pulled over by the two cops?
I did see that, yeah.
I mean, I just, I've lived in this country for 30 years, and it's I understand that loads of people have guns and cops have a really risky job and they have to be careful, but why is the first instinct with any situation to start pointing a gun in somebody's face and then become completely hyper?
Yeah.
I mean, the tension in that, there was nothing. I'm looking for professionalism. I'm seeing scared people with guns pointing guns.
Yeah.
It's this is how we deal with human interactions. I mean, cops where I come from pull people over all the time. Their first instinct isn't sort of and now I will pull out a weapon and stick it in their face and pepper spray them just for fun. Mm-hmm. What is going on? Why is that the default reaction is so aggressive, so violent?
I don't know. I mean, I think about this more and more as you see, just a regular traffic stop, and then you're like, oh God, should I pull, should I help this person? Like, what role should I play, or just, be the passive bystander? Because you don't know if the person's going to go get hysterical and start and pull their gun out, or if it's just going to be a routine, show me your driver's license. I think it's hard to know what the atmosphere is like in any of those situations. I don't know.
But I'll give you, so again, I was just following the press coverage of the shooting that happened the other day in Minneapolis, and, the cop may have been going for his taser or whatever, right? But, basically this guy's got a warrant out after him. They pull him over. He basically does a runner. I don't know if he's actually running. He gets back in the car, right? So he gets back in the car and goes to the driver. Now, if you were in the UK and you tried that, what happened is the cop would get back in the car and they would follow you. Whereas here, somehow you're immediately reaching for a weapon to try and end someone.
Yeah.
It's like, why is death the default interaction?
Yeah, I mean, this is why it doesn't go to trial very often, because all of this is lawful, right? I mean, all of the extreme behaviors are.
Although, did you see Maryland, what they did to Larry Hogan?
No, what do they do?
Oh, so basically the state Senate overrode his veto on 2 police reform bills. One of which basically essentially gets rid of the police kind of Bill of Rights / autonomy from prosecution.
Oh, really?
So there is actually, there is actually a step up on this. Absolutely.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, and of course, the reason why this trial is ongoing is that there's a new attorney general, former Congressman Keith Ellison, that pursued this particular case too. So, I mean, that's interesting just about the systemic change.
But does it make any difference? So let's go. I mean, the Derek Chauvin trial, you've got a guy who used egregious and very public force to end someone's life on the concrete, right? So that's something where you can't turn that one off once you've seen it, right? So that one goes to trial. So let's say that he goes to jail. Does anything fundamental change?
I know.
Do we stop instantly pulling guns on people?
I know. And the reason why I'm fumbling around so much right now is that there just is no... I worry that it doesn't make a difference, and I worry that this is now just the standard. This is the operating protocol for traffic stops. Is cops pull their gun on you, and
right.
I don't think it makes a difference. I mean, look at what's happening. Already we have so many different examples after George Floyd. So it's hard to know what makes the difference until we start really thinking about some sort of reform. And I don't know how that reform happens with such strong police unions. And I don't know what happens. I mean,
have you also been following the rise of the Anti-Riot legislation that's going on at a state level?
No, I have not, but that just takes all the wind out of my sails.
So basically, right, it's like in response to all of the civil unrest last year, 90% of which was completely peaceful, we're basically going to criminalize the taking part in these events. And even if nothing really bad happens, if you want to do things like, for example, get a state job or claim public benefits at any point in the future, and you have been arrested or involved in one of these things in a way we don't like, that's it, you're done. So you take marginalized communities that depend upon these types of services and then basically use that as a threat to make sure that they stop protesting. So our way of engagement is yet more disciplining of these communities.
But I'm assuming that insurrection at the Capitol doesn't fall into that. That I can try to take over the U.S. Capitol and be okay, but like a protest in the streets probably is not okay.
Yeah, in your own hometown, that's definitely legal. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you got the memo on that one.
Oh geez, this is just like a cavalcade of like bummer stuff to talk about. I mean,
one day we're going to do the Martin Carrie show and it's going to be awesome all the way through. Awesome.
Puppy dogs, and pancakes.
I mean, anything.
I mean,
also, when Brittany Spears finally gets rid of her custody agreement with her dad, like we can be like, right? I mean, whatever, anything.
What was your reaction to the failed union drive at Amazon in Alabama?
Saw that one coming.
Yeah.
I mean, basically the way that the National Labour Relations Board's been structured over the past, 30 years has basically been to permit the existence of unions, but to deny them any leverage or level playing field whatsoever vis-a-vis employers. So you have Amazon essentially running a very, very hard-ass publicity campaign as to why this is a very bad idea for you to vote for this. this is a company that does a heck of a lot of, let's say, things like facial recognition technology. That, of course, the ballot would be secret, but we're just saying if everybody does vote, then, we might have to move the plant. And this is a very poor part of the country, so much so that the $15 an hour we pay is actually quite good. So what do you think? Yeah, no-brainer, absolutely. Did that reflect the true preferences of people? Well, to the extent that they were given a limited set of options, yeah, and you got to respect the vote. But it was not exactly a fair fight.
Yeah. You just think about, these are dangerous jobs. People get killed on the job. These are similar to other factory jobs when there's heavy machinery and there's dangerous stuff going on with that heavy machinery.
In the time it takes for us to make one of these episodes, the guy who owns Amazon has made another $1 billion. The notion that, they're paying some kind of fair wage, given their earnings, is just disgusting. And it's just all to the top, the top.
And on the flip side of that, the person working in the warehouse has been forced to make 58 million trips to, build 12 packages, or else they're going to get fined and thrown out of their job or something. It's
right.
Just...
And then you got the guy who's delivering it to you, pissing in a bottle.
Yeah. I know.
Really? This is what we're defending, right? At the end of the day, we're saying, no, we don't want a union to represent these people or actually have some kind of collective voice or constructive engagement with the firm. We want you to piss in a bottle and we want you to basically have a hernia.
Yeah.
And it's $15 an hour. Yeah. Take it or leave it.
Yeah. And to your point too, just doing the math, and this is, it's not hard to do, I don't think. But $15 an hour is $30,000 a year. This is not living in some some fairyland where this is still qualifies most families for free lunch. For a range of security stuff. So I'm with you, that $15 an hour is this magic number, and all your worries go away.
Yeah. So what about the rest of the world? Are they screwing up as badly? Europe still has no vaccines, but that might eventually sort itself out. What else is going on?
What, I hate to ask you this because you're going to roll your eyes at me, but what's happening with Brexit?
We're having, Brexit update. Well, Northern Ireland's kicking off.
I'm sorry to say I've paid zero attention.
Okay, so this is kind of important.
Okay.
So for 30 years, the two communities in Ireland, the 6 counties in the north and then the Republic of Ireland, were basically in a civil war that was mediated by British troops being on the street. You did know that bit, right?
Yes.
And then they signed these agreements called the Good Friday Agreements, and the Good Friday Agreements basically kind of integrated the communities a little bit better, etc. And it all worked well because they were all in the European Union together. Brexit comes along, dumps a border in the Irish Sea so that you don't have a hard border along the Irish border. But that has the effect of creating incredible delays and paperwork and all the rest of it for stuff getting to Northern Ireland, right? So now you've got a situation whereby you have one of the poorest communities in the United Kingdom, and essentially the Belfast economy and the greater or Northern Ireland economy. It's a beautiful part of the world. If it just didn't sort of, have to deal with post-industrial decline, sectarianism, and a lack of investment. It lives completely off of transfers from London. And unfortunately, Brexit comes in and complicates this whole thing. So what it's done is it's signaled particularly to kind of the the loyalists, as they're called, the Protestant youth of Northern Ireland, that things here suck. A, they do. B, they're not getting any better. C, nobody really cares. D, Boris Johnson and the Tories, our traditional allies, the Unionists, have sold us down the river because we are the sacrificial lambs for Brexit. And we'll go back to C, nobody cares. So they're throwing bottles and petrol bombs and kicking off and all the rest of it, in a sense to basically draw attention to the fact that A, nobody cares, B, nobody cares, and C, nobody cares. But the danger here, of course, is that you still have a lot of tension between the two communities in Northern Ireland, and the peace process is always a process, and it can grind to a halt. And there's a feeling that sort of what's gone on so far has really benefited the Republic and benefited Republicans in the North. And what was once this community, which very much kind of, it's a bit like the kind of the what do you call it again? The kind of white resentment theory, that this once dominant group is losing its status and its privileges, and that's why you're getting this. And to a certain extent, yeah, that's kind of what's happened. There used to be, the richest part of the community, and now the whole community is poor. particularly vis-a-vis the Republic, and they feel as if Britain's abandoned them, which they have.
But didn't Northern Ireland know in the Brexit talks that the border was going to move?
Yes, but everyone was talking complete nonsense during the British Brexit debates. And you even had Northern Ireland leading politicians campaigning for Brexit, which just shows you how utterly stupid the whole thing was.
So, I mean,
maybe they thought that once you got out of the EU, the British government would be forced to invest more in Northern Ireland, but no.
Because that seems like a real going against your own interests to be then, trying to support Brexit given where we are right now.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Okay, if I totally missed something,
that's it,
or not.
Yes, no.
But I mean, it's not. What's the outcome of this? More suckiness?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's a bit sort of like to make a really strange analogy, it's a bit like the relationship between Taiwan and the US and China.
Huh.
Right? If you actually really formalize what you're going to do, you'll probably create more problems than you solve.
Yeah.
But if you actually keep it ambiguous and you don't really do anything, it's just going to fester.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what's the logical solution for this? The logical solution is for both sides to kind of lose the identity politics built up over God knows how long, and to essentially join a united Ireland and just give up, integrate into this much richer community, become the second growth hub, benefit from basically massive EU funds that would come in, all the rest of it. Or you can sit around and be part of a British state that doesn't give a crap.
Mm-hmm.
And that community will sit around and hold on to the British thing because that's who they are.
Yeah.
They're not going to chuck in their lot with the Republicans. So what's the good answer out of that? What's the good solution out of that? I don't know what it is.
Yeah. So, I mean, in some ways, fester is at least some...
One positive thing in it is that, the politics there tended to be basically which flavour of unionism did you want? You had the centre, the right, and the far right. And now the largest political grouping is basically essentially the non-aligned, non-sectarian parties. So, because people are sick of it, basically.
Yeah.
So there is a kind of like a new set of developments there that you could possibly build on. But then it needs engagement. And if the British government to engage with those forces rather than the loyalists, that's yet another snub, right? There's no right thing to do in this area. Makes it very difficult.
Is there anything that isn't unrest, destruction, and, utter sadness that we could talk about?
Well, we could talk about Harry planning to go to his granddad's funeral.
I know. I thought that was nice. Meghan can't be there.
Do you think Meghan can't be there, or Meghan's just... Yeah, I mean, really,
like,
Meghan can't be there?
Doctor, tell me I can't travel in my private jet to this. Yeah.
I think, yes, there might be a bit of that, yeah.
But just the longevity of this family, you often refer to them as the German carpetbaggers, but man, they live for a long time. I mean, 99 years, however, 7 billion years as the consort or whatever his title was. That's
70 years,
some good health genes.
No, absolutely. And, the finest doctors in the world will keep you going forever. Plus, the whole family is basically 50% gin by this point. So, I'm sure the pickling effect does some good.
Yeah.
But, it's funny. He's an interesting character because, back in the day, he was this roguish example of masculinity and speaking your mind. And these days, if he was any younger and still in public life, he'd be hauled over the coals for all the stuff that he said that was sexist and racist and imperialist and the whole nine yards. And all of which was there. But, if you go back and read some of the great malapropes that this guy has said and all the rest of it, yes, some of it's outrageous, but you can clearly say that what he's trying to do is trying to be funny. Right? Whether it works or not, right? I'm not excusing it or anything like that, but you can tell that this is a guy that's trying to be funny, and that's his version of humour. And I think that tells us a lot about the royals. That your what's your first version of humour? Oh, I'll just reach for something vaguely racist, right?
Right. Oh, geez. Well, I mean, I guess it also tells you a lot about why his family or why his children seem to be dead inside or criminal. One or the other.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. We finally got a comment out of the mouth of Prince Andrew when he came out of the Remembrance Service that wasn't, "No, I'm not talking to the FBI."
Oh, jeez. Well, I mean, Charles did say something nice. He called him his dear father or something like that. So there seemed to be some emotional connection between father and son.
There is. But the thing about Charles is, the Queen will never abdicate. Like, she will just keep going. and she's likely to last as long as, you know, the Queen Mother. And not that was her mother, that was her father's mother. But anyway, actually, was that her mother? No, that was the wife of her father. That's what it was, right? So anyway, the Queen Mother lived till about 150,000 or something. So she's going to keep ticking along for a while. But at which point, you know, Charles still wants to be king, right? This notion he's just going to hand it over to the kids. He really wants his turn. But at which point he'll probably be about 80.
Yeah, and poor Charles will probably
it's just, the whole thing is just like, stop. Yeah. Can we just stop? Sorry, I mean, you've been wonderful as cannon fodder for doing The Crown, but can we just stop this?
Yeah.
Nobody needs this anymore. And one very telling thing about this, actually, it's quite funny. The BBC got complaints about the coverage of Philip's death, because it was too excessive.
Really?
They cancelled all the stuff that people actually wanted to see, and they put on all these patriotic music and special programs, and everyone's hitting the keyboard just going, what the hell is this? I don't give a crap about this old dude. Get EastEnders on, or whatever it happens to be.
Peaky Blinders.
Yeah.
Oh, that's it. Maybe, you know, the opinion polls are actually you know, voting with their feet on this one.
Well, exactly.
Right, because the opinion shows that they British don't want the royal family anymore. Is that right? I mean, that's what I thought.
And I haven't seen those polls. I think that they're obviously German propaganda and they can't be trusted.
Well, obviously, yeah.
God bless the Queen.
But that's interesting. I was going to ask you whether you thought the Queen was going to step down, but she'll hang on till the very end.
She'll hang on. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think that probably does it for us for now. I'm sure.
I think we've exhausted our April roundup.
Yes. Yeah.
Wasn't that hopeful?
No, I will try harder next time to have some optimism.
Yeah, next time I'm going to pick the dock of things to actually put in there, and it's going to be clowns, balloons, rainbow candy floss, and unicorns. Be prepared.
That. Yes, that sounds great. Well, I'll talk to you later. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.